What's up with y'all, man? It's your boy David. We are back with another reaction video. Today we are reacting to why Medieval Knights went completely insane. I mean, it's probably, medieval times, the Black Death, the Black Plague, all death and all that shit, and the way they were living, they basically were like shitting in fucking buckets and shit. I think anybody would go insane if they had to shit in a bucket consistently, and if they caught a common cold, they could possibly die from that. I think anyone would go insane. But with that being said, make sure you like and subscribe. We're trying to get to 1,000 subscribers. Let's get to it.
It's probably not news to anybody that fighting in incredibly brutal hand-to-hand combat for hours at a time, crushing guys' heads with maces, seeing your homies get impaled.
Ooh, speaking of crushing guys' heads with maces, bro, no cap, I swear to God. I didn't watch that new Game of Thrones show that came out with Egg in them and shit. I didn't watch that shit. But I will not lie to you, bro. When Baelor Targaryen got his fucking melon split, when I saw that clip on TikTok, broke my fucking heart. And his brother did that shit to him, broke my fucking heart. When they showed us the back of his head, broke my fucking heart, bro. They killed somebody who could have been the greatest king the Targaryens have ever had. Shit crazy.
Or beheaded, and then just kind of sitting there to deal with it in the aftermath probably had some seriously damaging long-term psychological effects. But it might actually be worse than we could even imagine, especially because the medieval mind was of course anatomically the same as ours, but spiritually it was way different. PTSD as a clinical diagnosis didn't exist until 1980, and it was essentially invented to describe what was happening to Vietnam veterans. To sum it up super simply, PTSD is a fear disorder with flashbacks and hypervigilance. It's basically like your central nervous system is stuck in the on position at all times. When you look through the medieval sources, you don't always find that kind of thing, and I think applying modern terms to the medieval past can sometimes be a stretch, which is a hilariously ironic thing for me to say, but anyway. What we can find in the medieval sources is something even deeper. There was an 11th century French warrior named Rigaud, who had gotten pretty seriously injured in a battle. He somehow survived, but his right arm was totally paralyzed, and there wasn't really a lot that medieval doctors could do for that kind of thing. Rigaud ended up falling into a deep depression when he got home, and according to a contemporary chronicle, he wanted to die rather than drag out a disgusting and useless life with his body in such a shameful state.
I mean, he did lose his right arm. I mean, like it wasn't cut off, but still, like you can't move that shit. It's just stuck just like this. Just I know that shit sucks. I know that shit blows. No cap. And he's fighting a war. Oh man. It's crazy what humans do to each other on back then, especially even now, just crazy what humans do to each other, bro. No cap.
The injury obviously had forced him to give up his life as a soldier, but in medieval society, that was his role. He was one of those who fought, and now he was nothing. If you keep on reading the chronicle, Rigaud just keeps going deeper and deeper into this downward spiral, and even stops doing the things that used to make him happy, like riding horses. For a red-blooded, testosterone-filled medieval man to not want to zoom around on a steed, something had to be seriously wrong. We can look at another example from the 11th century, which is recorded in a Viking saga called the Grettis. There was a Viking warrior named Onund, and he lost his lower leg in a brutal battle in the late 9th century. Maybe you can see where this is going. When he gets home, he's fitted with a wooden prosthetic leg, and in typical medieval fashion, everybody starts calling him Onund Treeleg, which in terms of medieval nicknames is actually much better than Notker the Stammerer or Louis the Fat. Eventually his leg healed up as much as it could, and he could walk around with the prosthetic, but mentally he was never the same. Someone asked him why he was—
Oh, no, I ain't gonna lie, for it being the medieval ages, him getting a prosthetic that actually kind of sort of worked, it's not too bad, bro. Actually, damn. I thought he would just never be able to fucking walk on that leg forever and ever and ever. Because, it's medieval times. They didn't know germs existed, so I don't even, know. Like, this is crazy.
So down all the time, and Onund replied, "In eyes of fighting man and thane, my strength and manhood are but vain. This is the thing that makes me a joyless man." If you've ever seen PTSD portrayed in movies or TV shows, it's always something like a veteran coming back from war, and he takes his family out to the fair or something, and then like a car backfires in the parking lot, and all of a sudden he's back in Fallujah again. But that's not what we're seeing here. These medieval men have their identities completely tied up, not only in their combat abilities, but also in their ability to physically contribute to the community. Once that's gone, it's like they're just a burden and they become these ghosts. Now, all of this isn't to say that PTSD didn't exist in the Middle Ages, and if you've ever clicked an article or watched a YouTube video about medieval PTSD, they're probably
Which, who's just searching that up? Like, do you know how goddamn, like, how much free time you have to just search up medieval PTSD? Go. That just speaks to how much information there is now. Like, we could just watch a YouTube video on medieval dudes getting PTSD for fun, for shits and giggles. That's golly, bro. That's crazy.
talking about cases like Sir Peter Bayarn, who the French chronicler Jean Froissart mentions in his retelling of the Hundred Years' War. Peter doesn't have any physical injuries from all the combat experiences he's lived through, but from what Froissart tells us, Peter is clearly pretty mentally damaged. When he gets home from the war, his marriage breaks down, his wife leaves him and of course takes the kids. He starts having these lucid nightmares and he develops this fear of sleeping alone. Froissart specifically notes, Sir Peter has a habit when he is asleep at night of getting up and arming himself. He draws his sword in fights, but he does not know with whom. So we've got guys like Peter who don't have any physical injuries, but they're mentally scarred. Then we've got guys like Onan Treeleg, whose physical injuries are also causing some kind of emotional injury that forces them into this downward spiral. There was an understanding in medieval medical theory that traumatic injuries could lead to long-term depression, and an English friar aptly named Bartholomeus Anglicus actually wrote a lot about depression and had a shockingly modern understanding of it. He wasn't examining mental health for soldiers specifically, but when he talks about treatment options, he recommends having the person taken out of their stressful environment, giving them comfort and encouragement and music therapy, along with these small, easy tasks to keep the mind occupied while they get back on their feet. I know I'm beating a dead horse in my videos at this point, but the popular conception of the Middle Ages is that it was 1,000 years of savage darkness and backwardness, but here's a
Which is not wrong. I know. We're here to sort of kind of, put a little light in the darkness that was the Middle Ages, but they were shitting in their hands, basically, and smearing it on the walls, and they basically ate mummies, and they fought crusades for no reason, and fought meaningless wars for no reason, and the Black Death and the Black Plague killed damn near 40 million people, and shit like that. They didn't know what the fuck they were doing. Their art was trash. Shout out to the Renaissance, because before then they didn't know what the fuck they was doing. They were terrible. But I guess this is like a slight bright spot in an otherwise shitty ass era in human history. No cap.
13th century friar recommending essentially the same treatment that a modern psychiatrist would. I think this is because medieval physicians understood that they were actually treating something that we've only recently come to rediscover in the 21st century, which is the concept of moral injury. PTSD is tied to fear and an overactive nervous system, but moral injury is usually more associated with guilt, shame, regret, betrayal, a loss of meaning or identity. So someone with PTSD might constantly be thinking, I'm not safe, but a person with a moral injury might be thinking, I'm not a good person, or the world isn't the way I thought it was. Also, if you've ever watched one of my videos, you know that medieval people had a very specific conception of how the world worked and what their individual place was in it, and it was a much more concrete conception than what we have now. So that's really important to understand and remember. If this conception got shattered, the consequences could be totally disastrous. The term moral injury was actually coined by the psychiatrist Jonathan Shea in his book Achilles in Vietnam, which I highly recommend if the topic of this video interests you. Although it focuses more on mental trauma in the classical world, it's still very relevant. Shea says that veterans can usually recover from horror, fear, and grief once they get home and they start reintegrating into civilian life, provided that what they think of as right hasn't also been violated. So basically, you can survive the terrors of war, but what leaves the real lasting damage is when you survive doing something or watching something be done that violates everything you believe about how the world
they a firing squad, but you're killing women and children instead of soldiers or some shit, or you're hurting prisoners of war. Like, that probably would fuck somebody up crazy. You know what I'm saying?
world is supposed to work. So just think about a knight going on crusade who exists in this moral framework of the church and the code of chivalry and the feudal bond and the whole concept that this war he's fighting in has been blessed by God. I have to stress that these guys—
And then the war shows him that the conflict he's fighting in has not been blessed by God, but is instead kind of just a war of stupidity and attrition and bullshit. in a meaningless war. Man, nothing hurts a soldier more than fighting a meaningless war. Like for real. That's why niggas be trying to find meaning, because human beings like need to find meaning in shit all the time. So could you imagine sending somebody to go fight a meaningless war? Like he goes to the war, he's like, "Oh, I'm fighting for God and for glory," and then he comes back home. He's like, "Man, we didn't really do shit, bro. We rolled in the dirt and walked in that hot ass sun for fun." No wonder he's fucking depressed. Isn't he? He wasted his life.
Were really fighting for something they believed in. And I have to stress again that everything was so specific in the medieval mind. The system they lived in told them exactly what they were fighting for, what the rules were, what it meant to violate those rules, etc., etc. So when that whole system broke down, my question is, does that knight's whole idea of reality break down with it? Well, thank the good Lord above, we have a perfect contemporary chronicler to answer this exact question, and his name was Jean de Joinville. Jean wasn't a career soldier, he was a regional lord and really more of an administrator than a fighter, which I actually think makes his account even more interesting to us. In 1244, the French king Louis IX, who would later become Saint Louis, started organizing the Seventh Crusade. At this point, the Crusades still loomed really large in the European imagination, even though the returns had been diminishing for quite a while, and Jean joined up partly out of a sense of feudal duty and also because his father had gone on crusade 35 years before against the Albigensians. Long story short, the Seventh Crusade was a complete disaster in pretty much every sense of the word. The basic strategy was to cross the Mediterranean, invade Egypt, and then take the army and march up into the Holy Land from the south. It didn't work out that way at all. The army pretty much immediately got cut off from its supply lines, tons of soldiers died from dysentery or scurvy, and then whoever could still fight was crushed by the Mamluks at the Battle of Al-Mansura in 1250. Jean's account of the battle is actually incredible.
No wonder these niggas got depression. They got cut off of supply lines. The niggas who thought they were gonna die in a fight died because of fucking bowel issues and a vitamin C deficiency. And to top it all off, they got fucking spanked by Muslims. Hey, I'd be depressed too, boss. I heard kids. Bro, I'd be depressed too, boss. A hardcore Christian getting spanked by Muslims. Bro, I ain't gonna lie. Oh shit.
Forgive me for getting hyped up about this, but this is the kind of thing that gets me out of bed in the morning. All I want to do is to reach across the centuries and put myself in the shoes of someone 800 years ago. What did it smell like and taste like? Give me the texture. I love this because Jean doesn't describe the battle as this sequence of heroic actions, which is what you would get in epic poetry from the Middle Ages. He narrates it as this mishmash of these close calls and then this general insanity and chaos, but then a few moments.
It was some mishmash, some bullshit, and then they got spanked by Muslims. End of story. End of story.
Moments that stick in his brain. He says, "While I was on foot with my knights, wounded, as I have already told you, up came the king with his own division. There was a great shouting and a tremendous noise of trumpets and kettle drums. He halted on a raised roadway. Never have I seen so fine a man in arms. He towered head and shoulders over."
Yeah, he just glazed the fuck out this nigga. He called this man fine. What the fuck?
For his people, a gilded helmet on his head, and in his hand a sword of German steel. When he had halted there, the good knights of his household hurled themselves into the midst of the Turks. You must know that this was a great feat of arms, for there was no shooting of arrows nor bolts. On both sides, it was a fight with mace and sword. Let's just take a second to talk about what's happening psychologically here. So Jean is wounded, he's on foot, he's surrounded by chaos, and the detail that burns itself into his memory is the image of the king. This is actually how traumatized memory tends to work. Everything is this crazy blur, and then one or two images crystallize and stick. It's like the brain has to cling to something stable when everything else is falling apart. Somehow, miraculously, Jean survived all of this and managed to get back to France in one piece, although presumably he was pretty shaken from the whole experience. 20 years later, King Louis tried to get the boys back together for another crusade, and shockingly, a lot of people said yes, even though the last one had been a complete catastrophe, but Jean put his foot down and said no. He had gone on the Seventh Crusade with this enthusiasm and this idea that God had willed it and they were going to capture the Holy Land from the godless heathens. But then the actual reality was that the whole thing was kind of pointless, and the flower of—
That's what I'm saying. This shit pointless as fuck. They was out here fighting pointless wars and shit, bro. Like, I hate, that's what did I hate. Like, if we're gonna have a war, can we have a war that means something, like that actually like it's important? Like they're fighting for their freedom? No. None of these medieval wars is ever about fighting for your freedom or for some people you value. It's about going into somebody's house and kicking them out of their fucking house, and then getting mad when they kick you out of their house. What the fuck? Like, yo, this is ridiculous. That's why I will always shit talk the medieval era. Them niggas are fucking. They were stupid. They were stupid and dirty and uncultured and unwashed. Like, bruh, fuck.
The French nobility, along with the rest of the army, pooped themselves to death or had their flesh rot off from gangrene before they even got to fight the enemy. Now, it's important to mention here that Jean is writing all this, or actually dictating it, about 50 years after the events he's describing. So he's an old man at this point, looking back at his life. When you read his account, you can tell he's trying to recreate this world of the holy crusading king that no longer existed in the France he lived in. But at this point, King Louis is dead, his fellow veterans are dead, the Crusades were all a failure, and Jean is sitting there thinking the same thing that a lot of American veterans have found themselves thinking in the past few decades. What were we even doing there?
That's what I'm saying. Y'all fighting pointless bullshit wars every time. Like, every single time.
What was the point of all this suffering? We'll never know if he had any symptoms of PTSD, but we can certainly tell that he's carrying an injured soul and that his entire worldview was crushed by this event he lived through in his early 20s. But like I said before, Jean wasn't a career soldier. He kind of just tagged along in the crusade out of a sense of Christian feudal duty to his holy king. I want to look at like a career soldier. What about the guys who did this kind of thing constantly? What kind of psychological effect did it have on them? If you've been watching this channel for a while, you already know I think about attention a lot.
Hey, shout out to you, brother.
Have shirt.
W sponsorship.
Really a connection for me here because Jean de Joinville's grandson, Geoffroy de Charny, is exactly the guy we're looking for. He grew up hearing his grandfather's stories about the Crusades, and he ended up going to war himself, and then he basically came up with this whole philosophical system to try and make sense of all the suffering. Geoffroy was the third son in his family, which in the Middle Ages meant he inherited absolutely nothing. That really sucks, but what's cool for us is that it meant he had to become a tournament fighter and earn money and honor by messing people up. Eventually, he graduated to real warfare during the 100 Years' War and got captured and ransomed by the English twice. There's also this story about Geoffroy where he apparently once tracked down a man who had betrayed him, dragged him out of bed, decapitated him, and mounted the body parts on the town gates. Eventually, he was appointed the job.
Man, that nigga violent as fuck. God damn, bro. Shit.
Of bearer of the Oriflamme, which was the sacred battle standard of France. This was a ridiculously dangerous job because you're the guy holding this incredibly important ceremonial flag, which means everyone on the other side is going to notice you and try to kill you immediately so they can steal the flag, because that type of thing was huge for medieval battlefield morale. He actually did end up dying at the Battle of Poitiers in 1356 with the flag still in his hands, surrounded by 5 English soldiers who he had apparently taken with him. Geoffroy was, of course, very much respected by every dude in the realm, and sometime before his heroic death at Poitiers, he actually wrote a book called The Book of Chivalry, which for about a century afterwards was basically the operating manual for French knighthood. What's interesting about the book is that Geoffroy is pretty blunt about the reality of war. It's not like some flowery ode to fighting or whatever. He talks about the hunger and the thirst and the sleepless nights, battling for days at a time, watching your friends die. The point of mentioning all this stuff is because he wants the reader, who's presumably a young knight, to know what's coming. There's this part where Geoffroy talks about...
You know, I really respect when niggas do that shit, though. Like, sometimes niggas be trying to romanticize violence. Like, a lot of times in shows, they'll make it seem cool to fight. But, bro, I'm gonna keep it on it, bro. Fighting is not fun. Fighting hurts every single time. Hey, could you, like, cause I'm thinking, like, back to every time I ever got in a fight. Fighting hurts every single time. It sucks every single time. So could you imagine fighting to survive or fighting to kill somebody? I know that shit sucks. Ain't no way. Be for real.
About a certain point on a military campaign where you feel like, and I quote, even nature is going against you. If you look at the context, it seems like he's doing his best to describe this sensation of your own body becoming alien to you, something that we would label today as disassociation. Of course, his solution to this is to push through it, but the fact that he even acknowledges it in a 14th century book is actually pretty insane. You don't really find that kind of thing a lot. Another idea that Geoffroy touches on frequently is terror, which definitely means the fear of death, but more importantly to him and to the chivalrous French mind, the fear of shame. The whole late medieval Western ethical system that he exists in is built on a single idea, which is that the worth of any deed is measured by how much it costs you to accomplish it. Jousting is good, tournament fighting is a little better because it's more like war. Real war is the best of them all because it actually destroys you. The suffering is what makes it worth anything. You see this idea a lot in medieval thinking, like imagine monks finding God through fasting and wearing hair shirts so they're constantly uncomfortable or in pain. So basically what we've ended up with here is a system where the psychological wounds of war aren't really something to be avoided.
It's like the only value in these things is the suffering it brings, which is such a disgusting mindset to have, by the way. Hey, I'm gonna talk about these medieval niggas once more. Bro, that is such a weak way to assign value to something, you know, like, especially something as meaningless as war. Like, bruh, like, war is only good because the pain it causes you. That gives you clout. I mean, okay, bro, like, what the fuck?
Or even necessarily treated. There's something that you have to earn and then endure, but then you convert them into your identity. At least that's what Geoffroy did. You're not allowed to not be damaged because being damaged is proof that you were there. Also kind of ironic, or maybe actually heroic, depending on how you look at it, that he wrote a book about what it looks like to be destroyed by war and to keep going anyway, and then he died proving that point. There's a reason he's remembered as one of the coldest knights who ever lived. Let's go a little more local for a second. Medieval people witnessed way more violence in their day-to-day lives than we do, so it's worth exploring how that impacted their mental health in a broader communal way. To do that, we have to look at one of the most incredible surviving documents from the late Middle Ages, a canonization inquest from 1363 in Provence, southeastern France. A canonization inquest was basically a papal legal proceeding to determine whether or not someone should be a saint, and in this case, the candidate was a noblewoman named Countess Delphine de Plumichel. She had passed away about 3 years before the inquest, and a bunch of people in the local community believed that she had maintained some kind of mystical direct line to God during her life. So 68 witnesses came before the two papal representatives, and they testified about Delphine's miracles and their own experiences. What does any of this have to do with PTSD or moral injury, you ask? Stick with me, I'm leading you on the beautiful, sensual dance of history. The witnesses in the inquest had all survived the Black Death, mercenary invasions, and civil war in a 20-year window between 1343 and 1363.
Man, that's a stressful ass 20 years. God damn, nigga. Fuck.
That's a lot to try and process in such a short period of time. These people ran the spectrum of medieval society. You have merchants and soldiers and servants and noble lords and local nuns and future cardinals, but they all give a similar description of what Delphine was best at healing. All the stuff that they had gone through in the last few decades had left them with these internal emotional wounds that they couldn't really explain or properly describe, but she was able to somehow make them go away. So these are 14th century people in rural France explicitly articulating that war and violence produce a different kind of wound than physical illness, which means it requires a different kind of healing. Let's just pull an example from the inquests and see what we can see. One of the witnesses is a local lord named Ferrarius of Coucoron. In May of 1358, he's ordered to lead his troops in an attempt to retake the walled town of Coucoron from a mercenary company that's been terrorizing the area. Before the battle, he's all messed up. He visits Delphine and he tells her about the whole situation. What he says is that he's
so Delphine's a fucking therapist. They're about to canonize a therapist. Yo. That's funny, bruh.
Afraid of going into battle, but he's also afraid of not going because retreating would bring this unbearable shame on him and his household. Ferrarius is trapped here. This medieval honor code has kind of forced him into a position where both of the available choices absolutely suck. If he fights, he's probably going to have to kill somebody, which the church understood as a wound to the soul, or he himself could die. Then if he doesn't fight, that's cowardice, which messes with your identity and your social standing. Delphine, of course, tells him not to go, but he tells her he can't follow her advice because, and I quote, he did not dare to follow her warning because he would be shamed and reproached for timidity. So Delphine makes him a promise, which is that he won't kill anyone and she'll somehow intercede directly with God on his behalf. She's basically doing her best to try and manage his moral injury before it even happens. Now, miracles happen pretty frequently in the Middle Ages, and I personally believe miracles still happen now, but we're just too distracted and overstimulated to notice them. Everything Delphine told him ended up coming true. Both of his horses went lame, he was forced to leave the battlefield, his men charged ahead without him right into an ambush and they get slaughtered, but he escapes unscathed with his honor and his soul still intact. Boom, not bad. When the papal commissioners questioned Ferrarius about this, they asked him directly, if the horses hadn't been injured, would you have ridden with your men? It is kind of a loaded question because he's testifying in a cathedral in front of a bishop and an archbishop, so he wants to look like a good Christian, but he still answers honestly, yes, he would.
Like a good Christian. Yo, fuck you, buddy. What the hell? He's a lord. He has to fight. What the hell? Kind of stupid ass question is that? He has to charge with them, bro. What the fuck? Yo, I just need one stupid and loaded question ever, bro.
Would have ridden. Of course he would have ridden. He's a knight, for God's sake. His fear of shame would have overridden his fear of death. He would have been in that ambush and he would have died right alongside his men. Let's just sit and let this marinate for just a second. This man came before a papal court and admitted publicly that he had been afraid. This chivalrous Catholic warrior had been afraid. He admitted that he had literally needed divine intervention to survive with his honor intact. The inquest basically gave him a structured, communal space to tell that story, and in telling it, he was able to process it. It's the same way that Jean de Joinville was able to process his trauma by dictating it all out loud to a scribe 50 years after the fact. This is a civilization that understood at some level what moral injury required for healing. They built something, the inquest, the penance, the community, the saint, that basically functioned as a structured space for doing the work that moral injury requires. Confession, narrative, and public witness, and communal reintegration. But let's put the finishing touches on this medieval masterpiece. I'm not saying that medieval soldiers didn't suffer from PTSD. I mean, they almost certainly did. Even Jeff Charny in his book on chivalry mentions that something knights will have to deal with when they come home from war is, I quote, being beset by great terrors. So clearly this was a thing. What I'm really trying to say is that we spent the last 100 years or so treating combat trauma as a strictly medical problem, and the solutions are usually prescriptions or cognitive behavioral therapy. Sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't, but I think what's important for us to understand is that moral wounds are very real and need to be treated as such. I know I say this in every video, and I've already said it in this one, but everyone thinks of the Middle Ages as this brutal and chaotic time where nobody knew anything, but just look at the evidence I've laid out here. Clearly, in some ways, they understood the nuances of
Well, a broken clock can be right, I don't know what, twice a day. And they knew shit, but they were still dumb as fuck though. I don't give a fuck what nobody told. They were still dumb as hell. I don't give a fuck.
mental health better than we do. But what do you think? Is there something to
Hey,
this?
but with that being said, make sure you like and subscribe. We're trying to get to 1,000 subscribers, man. This has been why Medieval Knights went completely insane. If you have anything to react to, leave in the comments down below. And I'm gonna catch you on the next one. We're gonna roll to 1,000 subscribers. We out.